Montana Territory, 1875. The Gallatin River flowed swift and cold beneath a sky bruised with approaching twilight. This untamed corner of the frontier held no patience for weakness, no mercy for the soft-hearted. At least, that's what Zachariah Vance told himself as he guided his sorrel gelding along the riverbank, the setting sun painting the water in streaks of amber and gold. At 25, Zach had already weathered more than his share of frontier hardships. Orphaned at 14 when Apache raiders swept through their homestead, he'd buried his parents with his own hands before joining a cattle outfit heading north. He'd learned to ride, rope, and survive in a land that took far more than it gave. The harsh lessons of the trail had carved themselves into his lean frame and watchful blue eyes. "A man stands alone out here," he murmured to his horse as they picked their way through riverside willows. "Folks who lean on others just end up face down in the dirt when those others don't come through." His was a solitary existence by design. He hired on with ranches during spring roundups, drove cattle north in summer, trapped pelts in winter, and kept his own counsel year-round. Women had crossed his path, saloon girls, ranchers' daughters, widows running boarding houses, but Zach made certain none ventured past the careful walls he'd built around himself. The frontier was no place for sentiment. Love was a luxury that got men killed. What he wanted was simple: enough money saved for a small spread of his own, where he could answer to no man. What he needed, though that thought remained buried beneath layers of stubborn independence, was something he refused to acknowledge. The horse's ears suddenly pricked forward. Zach tensed, hand moving instinctively to the colt at his hip. In the gathering dusk, sounds traveled strangely, but he could swear he heard crying. He rounded a bend in the river and saw her. She sat on a fallen cottonwood log, her slender shoulders shaking with each quiet sob. A young woman in a modest blue calico dress, her honey blonde hair tumbling loose from what had once been a tidy arrangement of pins. Even in distress, there was something striking about her profile against the darkening sky. Zach hesitated. Other people's troubles were precisely what he avoided. He could simply turn his horse and find another route to town. Nobody would be the wiser. But something held him there, watching as she dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief already damp with tears. Perhaps it was the utter desolation in her posture, or the realization that a young woman alone by the river at dusk was vulnerable to dangers she might not even recognize. He cleared his throat. "Miss? You all right there?" She startled violently, jumping to her feet and whirling to face him. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. She was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps 20 or 21, with eyes the color of summer sage and cheeks flushed from crying. "I'm sorry to frighten you," Zach said, dismounting but keeping a respectful distance. "Just seems a peculiar spot to be alone this time of evening." She straightened her shoulders, attempting dignity despite her tear-streaked face. I needed a moment of solitude." "Solitude's one thing," he replied carefully. "Safety's another. There's mountain lions that come down to drink at dusk, not to mention less savory sorts who might happen by." "Less savory than strange men approaching women without introduction?" she countered, but there was no real heat in her words. Just exhaustion. Zach removed his hat. "Zachariah Vance, ma'am. Most just call me Zach. I work cattle for the Double Bar outfit north of here." She seemed to study him, weighing his weathered appearance against some internal measure before responding. "Katherine Delaney. Most call me Kate." "Miss Delaney." He nodded. "May I ask what brings you to Weeping by the Gallatin at this hour?" "Bozeman's a fair walk from here." She turned away, facing the flowing water. "My brother died 3 weeks ago. Typhoid. We came west together after our parents passed in '73. Today would have been his birthday." Zach shifted uncomfortably, unfamiliar with offering comfort. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Michael was all I had left," she continued, her voice gaining a bitter edge. "And now the bank is foreclosing on the millinery shop we started together. By this time next week, I'll have neither family nor livelihood." The sensible part of Zach's mind urged him to offer condolences and be on his way. This woman's problems weren't his concern. Yet he found himself stepping closer, drawn by something in her proud bearing despite her circumstances. "And you've no other family? No one to turn to?" he asked. Katherine shook her head. "No one. I've been offered a position as a housekeeper for the bank manager's family, but—" She trailed off, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Before Zach could stop himself, He'd closed the distance between them. Standing beside her as the river rushed past, he found himself saying words that would forever alter the course of his carefully constructed solitary life. "You'll never cry alone again." The moment the words left his mouth, he was shocked by his own presumption. But as Katherine turned her surprised gaze to his face, something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits adrift in the vastness of the frontier. "You don't even know me, Mr. Vance," she said softly. "No," he admitted, "but I know what it's to lose everything. And I know the territory well enough to say no one should face it entirely alone." Their conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of riders approaching from the direction of town. Katherine tensed visibly. "That'll be Mr. Hollister and his men," she whispered. "The bank manager. He's been insistent about my accepting his offer of employment." Zach's eyes narrowed. "Insistent in what way?" Katherine looked away. "In ways that suggest employment might not be all he expects." Understanding dawned, and with it came a protectiveness Zach hadn't felt in years. Without thinking, he took her hand and led her toward his horse. "Miss Delaney, I believe we should continue this conversation elsewhere. My camp's not far, and you'd be safe there while we sort out your predicament." To his surprise, she didn't hesitate, gathering her skirts and accepting his help onto the saddle. As the sounds of approaching riders grew louder, Zach swung up behind her and urged his horse into the shelter of the trees, away from the riverbank. That split-second decision to help Katherine Delaney would prove to be the incident that challenged everything Zachariah Vance thought he knew about survival on the frontier. Over the next days, Katherine's presence in Zach's camp upended his solitary routines. He'd intended to escort her to the next town where she might find respectable work, but complications arose. Word spread that Hollister was offering a reward for information on Katherine's whereabouts, claiming she'd stolen money from the shop before fleeing. "It's a lie," Katherine insisted as they sat by the campfire 3 nights after their meeting. "Michael kept meticulous records. If anything, the bank owes us money." Zach studied her across the dancing flames. "You have proof of that?" "The ledger," she nodded, hidden beneath a floorboard in the shop. Michael was suspicious of Hollister for months before he fell ill. Zach thoughtfully chewed the venison he'd prepared. "That's valuable information, Miss Delaney." "Kate," she corrected. "If we're to be fugitives together, you might as well use my given name." Her smile, the first he'd seen from her, transformed her face. Something tightened in Zach's chest, a sensation foreign and unwelcome. He'd spent years ensuring no one could affect him this way. "I'm not a fugitive," he said, more gruffly than intended. "And this arrangement is temporary." Her smile dimmed. "Of course, I don't mean to impose on your solitude, Mr. Vance." "Zach," he found himself saying. "And it's not an imposition. Just complicated." The night grew colder, and Kate, moved closer to the fire. In the golden light, with her hair loose around her shoulders, she looked both vulnerable and determined. A contradiction that fascinated him despite his better judgment. "Why do you live this way?" she asked suddenly. "Alone, I mean. You're clearly capable and intelligent. Most men would have established themselves by now." The question struck too close to truths Zach preferred not to examine. "Attachments are liabilities out here. I learned young that counting on others leads to disappointment. Or to unexpected help," she countered gently. "Like finding a cowboy when you're crying by a river." Something in her words cracked a fissure in his carefully constructed beliefs. But before he could respond, a twig snapped in the darkness beyond their camp. Zach was on his feet instantly, revolver drawn. "Get behind me," he whispered. 3 shadows materialized at the edge of the firelight. Men with bandanas pulled up over their faces. "Well now," drawled the tallest figure. "Seems we've found the bank thief and her accomplice." Zach kept his voice steady. "You're mistaken. This lady's under my protection." The man laughed. "Hollister's paying $50 to bring her back. Dead or alive doesn't much matter to me." What happened next unfolded with the terrible clarity of violence. As the leader drew his weapon, Zach fired first, catching him in the shoulder. The second man lunged forward, and Kate screamed a warning as the third circled behind. Zach caught a glimpse of metal before pain exploded across the back of his head. The world went black. He awoke to the sensation of cool cloth against his forehead and the murmur of a soft voice. Opening his eyes, he found Kate bending over him, her face tight with concern. "Thank God," she breathed. "You've been unconscious for hours." Zach tried to sit up, groaning as the world tilted alarmingly. What happened? You shot one of them. The others dragged him away, but not before one knocked you out. Her hand steadied him. I was afraid you might not wake up. Takes more than a coward's blow to finish me, he muttered, though his pounding head suggested otherwise. As his vision cleared, he realized they weren't in his camp anymore. Where are we? An abandoned trapper's cabin about a mile upstream. I couldn't move you far, but I knew we couldn't stay there. Pride crept into her voice. I managed to pack your essentials and guide your horse here. Zach stared at her with new appreciation. This wasn't a helpless town girl, but a woman of remarkable resourcefulness. You saved us both. She shrugged. You'd have done the same for me. A shadow crossed her face. In fact, you already did. Over the following weeks, as Zach recovered and they moved deeper into the mountains to avoid Hollister's men, an undeniable bond formed between them. Kate revealed herself to be not only resilient but skilled with a hunting rifle and knowledgeable about wild plants. Gifts from a grandfather who'd believed girls should know survival as well as sewing. Zach found himself sharing stories he'd told no one about his parents, his years drifting from outfit to outfit, the dreams he barely acknowledged even to himself. You want a ranch of your own, Kate observed one evening as they rested in a high meadow dotted with wildflowers. Not just land, but a place that matters. Wanting and getting are different creatures, he replied, though her perception unsettled him. Not always, she said. Sometimes you just need to fight for what matters. Her words planted a seed. What if they retrieved the ledger from town? With proof of Hollister's corruption, they might not only clear Kate's name, but expose the banker's fraudulent dealings. The plan formed gradually, nurtured by long discussions beside night fires, and during careful reconnaissance of Bozeman's streets. They would enter town during the Independence Day celebrations when crowds and distractions would provide cover. As July approached, however, Zach found himself increasingly distracted not by the dangers of their plan, but by Kate herself. The way sunlight caught in her hair. How her laugh had grown more frequent as grief loosened its grip. The strength in her hands as she helped him dress a deer they'd hunted together. One afternoon, caught in a sudden mountain thunderstorm, they sheltered in a shallow cave. Rain curtained the entrance, turning the world beyond into a blur of gray and green. We make a good team, Kate said, wringing water from her skirts. I've been thinking about what happens after we clear my name. Zach tensed. He'd been avoiding this very question. You'll have options. Maybe reopen the millinery. Alone? She asked quietly. The word hung between them, heavy with implication. Zach found himself standing, moving toward her with an intent he couldn't articulate. When he reached her, words failed entirely. Instead, he traced the curve of her cheek with calloused fingers. Kate, he whispered, her name a question and answer both. Their kiss was tentative at first, then deepening with shared hunger. When they finally drew apart, breathless, Zach knew his carefully constructed solitude was crumbling for good. I never expected you, he admitted. Nor I you, she replied. But perhaps that's how it happens. The things we don't expect change us most. The night before they were to enter town, they made camp in the foothills overlooking Bozeman. Lights twinkled in the distance like earthbound stars. Preparations for the Independence Day festivities were visible even from afar. Tomorrow changes everything, Kate said, nestling against Zach's side. For better or worse. He tightened his arm around her. We'll get that ledger. Clear your name. And then, she pressed. Zach took a deep breath. And then, if you're willing, we could head north. There's good land near the Judith Basin. Enough for a small herd to start. Together? Her voice held cautious hope. Together, he confirmed, the word no longer frightening. Though we should probably make it proper first. Her kiss was answer enough. The following day dawned bright and clear, the town already bustling with celebration when they slipped in among the crowds. Kate wore a borrowed dress and bonnet that shadowed her face, while Zach had shaved his trail beard, appearing more respectable than he had in months. They separated at the town square, Zach to create a distraction near the bank while Kate retrieved the ledger from her former shop. The plan seemed to unfold smoothly, until Kate emerged from the millinery to find Hollister himself blocking her path. Miss Delaney, the banker said with cold pleasure. How convenient of you to return to the scene of your crime. From across the street, Zach saw the confrontation unfolding. He started forward, only to feel the press of a gun barrel against his ribs. "Not another step, cowboy," murmured a familiar voice, one of the men from their camp. "Boss wants to finish this proper." Zach watched helplessly as Hollister seized Kate's arm, the precious ledger clutched against her chest. Time slowed to an excruciating crawl as he weighed his options. He could draw his own weapon, but at this distance, in this crowd, the risk to Kate was too great. Then came the unexpected reversal that changed everything. "Thomas Hollister." A commanding voice cut through the holiday noise. Sheriff Malcolm Bennett strode through the crowd, accompanied by a distinguished man in an Eastern suit. "You're wanted for questioning by the Territorial Banking Commissioner." Confusion rippled through the onlookers. Hollister's grip on Kate loosened. "This is absurd. I'm apprehending a thief. The only thief here appears to be you," said the commissioner, taking the ledger Kate thrust toward him. "We've received complaints about irregular practices at your bank from 3 counties." In the momentary distraction, Zach drove an elbow into his captor's ribs, spinning away and drawing his Colt in one fluid motion. "Drop it," he ordered. The man hesitated, then let his weapon fall. What followed was the most public confrontation Bozeman had witnessed in years. The ledger Kate had retrieved contained not only proof of her and Michael's honest dealings, but evidence of Hollister's systematic fraud against multiple business owners. The commissioner had been investigating quietly for months, building a case that Kate's evidence completed. By sundown, Hollister and 2 associates were in jail, and Kate stood vindicated before the town that had so recently believed her a criminal. The shop was returned to her possession, along with compensation for Hollister's false claims. But the victory brought an unexpected crisis. With her name cleared and her business restored, Kate had every reason to remain in Bozeman. The future Zach had begun to imagine, a shared ranch, a life built together, suddenly seemed a foolish dream. That night, as celebration continued in the streets, Zach found himself alone in the town's small hotel, preparing to leave at dawn. Kate had been swept up by well-wishers and former friends apologizing for believing the worst. He told himself this was for the best. Their time together had been born of necessity, not choice. Now that she had options again, why would she choose a rootless cowboy? He was packing his meager possessions when a knock came at his door. Opening it revealed Kate, her eyes bright with emotion. "You were leaving," she said, taking in his half-packed saddlebags. Without saying goodbye, Zach looked away. "Seemed simpler. You have your life back now. A life I no longer want. Not without you." She stepped into the room, closing the distance between them. "Did you mean it, Zach? About the ranch? About making things proper?" "Every word," he admitted. "But that was before. You don't need me anymore." "Need and want are different creatures," she said, echoing his own words from weeks before. "I want you, Zachariah Vance. I want the life we talked about building together." The walls he'd spent years constructing collapsed entirely as she reached for him. In that moment, Zach finally understood the truth that had been revealing itself since he found her crying by the river. Strength wasn't found in isolation, but in the courage to risk connection. 2 weeks later, they were married in a simple ceremony at the newly constructed Bozeman church. Kate wore a dress of pale blue silk, Zach a new suit that still felt stiff across his shoulders. Sheriff Bennett stood as witness, along with several townspeople who'd become allies during the exposure of Hollister's schemes. With the compensation money and the proceeds from selling the millinery, they purchased land near the Judith Basin, 200 acres of rolling grassland with a creek running through its heart. By autumn, they'd built a sturdy cabin and acquired a small herd of cattle to see them through the coming years. On a crisp October evening, they stood together on the porch of their new home, watching the setting sun paint the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. Kate leaned against Zach's shoulder, his arms secure around her waist. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Stopping that day by the river?" Zach considered the vast changes in his life since that moment. The dangers they'd faced, the truths they'd uncovered, the love that had grown between them despite his determination to remain untouched by such emotions. "Not for a single moment," he answered honestly. "You taught me what I couldn't learn alone." "And what's that?" she asked, turning in his embrace. "That the frontier isn't meant to be faced in solitude. That strength comes in sharing burdens, not carrying them alone." He brushed his lips against her forehead. "That home isn't a place. It's wherever we stand together." As darkness settled across their land, lights glowed warm in the windows of their cabin. Inside waited the future they'd fought to build. Not an easy one, for the Montana Territory would always demand resilience from those who claimed it, but a future rich with shared purpose and mutual support. For Zachariah Vance, who once believed the frontier allowed no room for connection, and Katherine Delaney, who had wept alone by a river believing all was lost, that future held the greatest treasure the West could offer, the certainty that whatever trials came, they would face them together, and neither would ever cry alone again.